Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. And Ranking Member, appreciate you. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I have the distinct privilege of representing Southeast Texas, but unfortunately that means that I'm far too familiar with these terrible storms and floods, and I continue to see these 2,000-year floods every 2 years. And we've had two sweeping through my district in the past 2 years, almost 2 years ago to the date when Hurricane Harvey swept through Southeast Texas, leaving a record rainfall in my district. Tropical Storm Imelda last week flooded the same Texans who were still recovering from Harvey. I've gotten calls from constituents who just weeks ago were finally able to move back into their homes when Imelda left them once more flooded out. Dr. Moore, Tropical Storm Imelda was upgraded from a typical rainmaker to a full-blown tropical storm, and many of my constituents were caught by surprise, including myself, as these floodwaters rose. Can you talk about the threat of rapid intensification, which some of you have addressed already this morning, and sometimes just hours before landfall for hurricanes, and how forecasters take this into account?
Just building upon what Marshal Shepard said earlier, that we really had a very unique meteorological condition, and yet we should be able to address unique meteorological conditions. And we have seen a pattern of our models not catching the intensification accurately. We've done better on the landfall prediction, but we don't seem to be catching the intensification, which is, after all, what really matters to those in the landfall region. I think that this is, again, where observations, particularly observations that are contemporaneous with the storm, that is, observations that are persistent, is an absolute requirement. And I think that if we had had a sounder in geostationary orbit, we would have done better in catching the intensification. It really is a product of the boundary layer in large measure. And I think that the fact that we have failed to catch this intensification has had a counterproductive effect upon the body politic. People begin to say, well, it's uncertain, or it wasn't predicted. And that leads to inaction. And so the fact that our models have let us down at certain stages should actually cause us to be more vigilant in terms of taking action. But important people will say, oh, well, I've been through this before, or there was this uncertainty, or the models are saying different things. And they use that as kind of a logic for inaction.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Dr. Sobel, I would say it's fairly common to see headlines claim that hurricane-related inland rainfall and flooding has increased due to climate change. Just earlier this month, the New York Times published an article that stated some attributes of storms, particularly the increasing amount of rainfall associated with many of them, have reached a very strong consensus. Yes. Yet NOAA concluded an anthropogenic influence has not been formally detected for hurricane precipitation. WMO stated no observational studies have provided convincing evidence of a detectable anthropogenic influence specifically on hurricane-related precipitation. USNCA said there is a lack of supporting detectable anthropogenic contribution and observed tropical cyclone data. And to me, this seems like the very opposite of any type of consensus, yet alone a very strong one. In your opinion, why is the public discourse, including from scientists, often at odds with thorough assessments like the ones NOAA, WMO, and others have published?
Thank you for the question. So I think it's important to understand the meaning of the word detect. I think that scientists in my field, and I include many of the great experts at NOAA who write those statements, but all of us use a very conservative standard. So what detection means is, can you say with 95% confidence that the changes we've seen could not have occurred without human influence? That's a very strong standard, and some of the limitations in that are simply the observations. In other words, you have numbers and intensities of hurricanes and rainfall that are fluctuating up and down year to year naturally. Any trends are slow upon that. The observations themselves have limitations, as Dr. Moore has said, especially with rainfall, which isn't measured that well through all parts of the hurricane. So it's a question of what those statements are saying is not that there aren't changes, but that you can't say, based on the observations with 95% confidence, that they couldn't have occurred naturally. But I don't think that's the right question to ask. So we know that the atmosphere has more water vapor. We know hurricanes are very good at squeezing that out. So from all sources of evidence we have from our physical understanding and our models show pretty substantial increases of rainfall in hurricanes. The observations are not contradicting that. They're simply so noisy that you can't pull out that signal. So I like my example of people speaking quietly in a crowded room. If it's loud, it doesn't mean, you can't necessarily say with 95% confidence what they're saying, but that's not a reason not to take it seriously. So I think that's where the tension is between the very conservative standard that's used for detection versus our scientific understanding of what's actually happening.
Thank you very much. My time has expired, which is unfortunate because I have other questions. Okay.